Very good. Thanks so much for having me, inviting me, and thanks for tuning in. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Let's see. I want full screen here. Good. Oh, wait a minute. This is not the beginning. Um, okay. So yeah, like in the introduction, this is the title. Essentially, I'm going to tell you what I think is the best idea to eat or avoid for optimal health and planetary health. The guiding principles are, two sides of one coin, really. So good diets tend to be environmentally sound. Good, nutritionally good diets tend to be environmentally sound, but there are some exceptions, and they only highlight the basic physics. They don't really negate it, but it's worth remembering that. You can be a vegan that eats very poorly, both from a nutritional and planetary or environmental standpoint, but it's not easy. Most plant-based diets are very good for both body and planet. And designing diets that minimize resource needs, if you are only interested in reducing your resource needs and completely forget about nutritional quality, you end up actually, without really trying, with epidemiologically superb diets. Okay. Um, okay. The obvious example is shown right here on the left is, I don't know, an American typical meal, if you can call it that. On the right is something I just made myself a few lunches ago. What does it have? Purple onion, tomato, black beans, some kimchi, nothing much really. Straightforward tomatoes. Good. So that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to compare different diets in terms of both the environmental and the nutritional standpoint. We'll start with a little survey of the key impacts, and the first one is emissions. Now, there are many good reasons to try to modify your diet to reduce your resource need. Emissions are important because it is the defining challenge of our time, but it is not something that agriculture actually dominates over. There are other things like transportation, power generation, and industry, and the the built environment that are either equal to agriculture or actually a little larger. But let's start with that because it's our defining challenge. Okay, so here is a nice paper that claims that food systems globally are responsible for about a third of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. That's a bit high. There will be those who take issue with that. But it's not really supremely important, the exact, if it's 27 or 31%. It's important, and that's enough, you know. Okay, so I wish, okay, I'll do this. Nice. Good. So, what is the concern here? Well, the concern is you see on the upper right here a simplified version of the global radiative balance. Okay, it's about 340 watts per meter squared. It comes down from the sun. About 100 or so is reflected either from high clouds or medium clouds or the surface. So the point is that this amount, this reflected 100 watts per meter square, that's stuff that came all the way from the sun clear to Earth, 150 million kilometers or so, only to be rejected at the last second and not contribute anything to planetary thermal balance because it's rejected right off the bat. And then there are some solar radiation that's absorbed by the atmosphere, most of it by ozone in the stratosphere, but not only, there's also water vapor and so on. Ultimately, you get of this 340 watts per meter squared, you get hitting the surface 160 watts per meter squared. And that's what warms the surface, okay? Now, the planet returns the favor by radiating infrared radiation to space. The issue with anthropogenic climate change is, take a look at how small it is. You see, if you subtract 100 from 340, you get 240, right? But here it says only 239 watts per meter squared go up. So there's 1 watt per meter squared, is actually 1.5 or so, but rounding, it's about 1 watt per meter squared extra, more warming the surface than is able to escape to space. That's our problem, this 1 watt out of 340 coming in. So it gives you a sense that it's a really small imbalance, but it adds up, of course, to the observed warming. So, so if we look at the impact of agriculture on all of that, and this is from a very, very nice paper in Science a few years ago, not ours, just a very nice paper. And you see here, right here, the global emissions, and they're broken roughly as 26% according to them. The other estimate we saw was about 1/3. Okay, so this is what I meant when I said others think it's a little smaller. So poor Nemechek pinned it at 26, and I find that a bit more persuasive. But it's somewhere in that vicinity, okay? And so it means that about 3/4 are not related to food, okay? So that's what I meant earlier when I said it's very important. Greenhouse gas emissions associated with food production are very important because of the great import of anthropogenic climate change. But it is not to say that agriculture dominates that. It is, in fact, about 1/4 to at most 1/3 of the scope of the problem globally. Okay? Now, if you look at what in the emissions, in the 1/4 of all emissions that are related to food, how is it partitioned among the different ways we feed ourselves? So you see that a large portion, maybe 1/4 of the quarter, is related to land use, which means simply you take a piece of land, let's say outside my window in upstate New York. If you left the land alone and came back 50 years later, you'll have a dense forest. So if you don't allow the forest to grow, but instead you grow cucumbers there, that changes the carbon balance, and that releases some carbon to the atmosphere, and that is the contribution related to land use, this bottom portion. Okay. I'm assuming that you can see my pointer. Let me know if you cannot, and then I'll refrain from using it. So the other roughly quarter, a little more, is related to crop production. Okay. And crops, this dark, whatever, blue, yellow, green, something like that. This portion contributes about 60% of all human edible protein, yet it only claims about a quarter of all emissions. So that right there tells you, oh, eating directly plant crops is a very effective way to feed ourselves. Now, here is livestock. It's nice that they say livestock and fisheries. It's very kind to the livestock industry, but you can forget about fisheries. It's just a small little icing on the cake. It's really livestock, okay? And that's 30%-ish of all food emissions, but it contributes very little. For example, in terms of calories, meat writ large contributes something like 350 kilocalories per person per day out of something like 2,800. So it contributes very little, and it claims a great deal of the total emissions. And finally, up top, you have the supply chain, and it's rather small. It's maybe 1/5 or even less. And that goes to show you that you don't really need to worry about, consuming local food or something like that. That's really, if you want it, you can do it. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's otherwise you're just spinning your wheels, achieving very little for a great deal of effort. So you might as well just shop normally and not worry about where the food is coming from. The exception to that would be highly perishable things like let's say you buy blueberries and they were flown. They can be flown even from Maine, but let's say they've been flown from New Zealand or Mexico, something like that. That's a non-starter. You really are enhancing greatly your emissions for very little benefit. So don't do that if you can help it. But mostly transportation is not really super important to the total emissions feeding ourselves requires. Okay, so this is very important, okay? Here I showed you some average statistics, okay? But you're confronted with that and you can just feel, okay, so that's what it is. What can I do about it? I need to eat. So it's terrible, maybe, if you look at it and you think it's terrible, you might think, it's terrible, but there's nothing I can do. It's not so terrible, actually, but it's easy to feel like there's nothing you can do. Well, actually, you can do a lot, okay? So here's a calculation that strives to quantify what happens if you replace either all the meat in the diet, this is for the American diet, or just the beef. This bar right here corresponds to all the meat in the diet, and this corresponds to only beef, okay? And you have two bars, let's call them sub-bars in each, okay? One is shown here in green, bright or muted green. That is how much emissions the plant-based replacement results in. This blue and red, that's how much what you replace, the meat that you replace, how much it emits. Okay, so let's flesh it out here, so to speak. Let's focus on replacing only beef, like as shown here, with some plant alternatives. The beef results in emitting something like 2.7. That's kilogram of CO2 equivalent per person every day, on average. And if you replace that, here is a nice Middle Eastern dish I made not that long ago. It's called sabacha. And here is, like I said, the emissions from producing that. And now, if you replace it with the plants, this or other of your choosing, this is how much you get. You see right here, if you replace the beef with plant-based alternatives, you drop your emissions to 15% of what they previously were. Okay, and this is not careless or random or any of those things replacement. This is an extremely methodical and careful replacement where not only do you conserve the protein, so you forgo this, and this supplies now a certain amount of protein, well, you require that the plant alternative replenishes or exceeds the amount of protein that you chose to forgo. But not only that, you're also satisfying 44 inequality constraints, such as no less of vitamin A or K, or no less selenium or zinc in your diet, or no more simple sugars than the replaced beef contains. In other words, you replace steak with the upper right plant alternative, but you do that with great nutritional care such that not only would you maintain health, you will actually improve it greatly. So you, just by making that one choice, you can eliminate 85% of your emissions. That's not small. 85% elimination, that's huge. Okay. Now, what about nutrition? That's very important. So, well, this quantifies that. And each nutrient, not all 44 are shown here, but some of the key ones are shown here. Let's take a look, for example, at beta carotene, which is, I'll show you and I'll quantify it in a minute, but this is a known protective nutrient. Okay, here is what it says. You see here a red little guy right here, and here is the beef replacement. That red, the degree to which it proceeds to the right, how far it goes to the right, that tells you how much beta carotene the beef that you're replacing used to give. This right here, with this uncertainty range, is how much you get from this carefully designed alternative that conserves protein, but is otherwise and is diverse. You know, in other words, we don't eat one or two plant items. We eat at least 5. So it's diverse, it's palatable, and so on. Okay, so what does, and what are the units here? For example, beta carotene, it says that you get 150% of the average amount of beta carotene the average American gets from their entire daily diet, you get 150% of that just from the small replacement. Does that make sense? You have the whole diet. Of that, the replaced beef is a very small contribution in terms of calories, in terms of protein, in terms of everything. It's very small. Okay? Just that replacing that tiny sliver of your diet from beef to a plant-based alternative, you get, instead of something like 5% of the beta carotene in your diet, you get something like 150. Okay, folate. Same idea, vitamin K, vitamin A, soluble fiber, phytosterols, total fiber, on and on and on. Almost each of the protective nutrients, you get far more by making this replacement. There's one exception, and that's B12. Yeah, of course. There is no B12 in plants, more or less, period. So, yeah, it's very simple to just, I do it with nutritional yeast, but a person can just pop a pill if they are really concerned about B12 deficiency. It's a real concern if you're not careful and you only eat plants and you are not paying attention to your B12 replacement. You can run into trouble. But it's very, very simple to ameliorate that or avoid that. Okay, so let's see what that does, okay, to the human body. So here is in the upper graph, the upper left graph, you see the hazard ratio for overall mortality as a function of circulating beta carotene in your blood. Okay. And what it says over here, you have the regime of people who eat almost no vegetables and no fruit to speak of. And they are very deficient in beta carotene. Well, they're about 40–50% more likely to die than, let's say, a person with 640 micrograms of beta carotene per liter of blood. Okay, so think about it, from 0.7 to 1.4, you doubled your odds of dying. This is not a small effect. This is like switching from a safe car to switching from somewhere around here to somewhere around here is almost like switching from a safe car to motorcycle racing or something like that. A huge doubling of your overall odds of dying. How about cardiovascular disease mortality? Well, it looks kind of the same to me. Again, at least within the low end of the curve, the more beta carotene in your circulating in your blood, the dramatically less likely you are to die. For example, here again is 1.4, and here again is 0.7, half the odds. The probability is half. Okay. Now, adding a whole bunch of it, in other words, here is eating a carrot a day, let's say. Here is eating a bag of carrots a day, and here is eating a box of carrots, or something like that. You get the picture. You don't need to become a rabbit. Just have a carrot every now and again, and you are in the desirable part of the curve. Conversely, don't worry about eating any of those, orange and yellow vegetables, and you may well end up on the left-hand side of the curve, which means doubling the odds of dying either from cardiovascular disease or from any cause. Okay. Um, Here's another one. If you recall right here, here's another nutrient, phytosterols, and this addresses the contribution of phytosterol in ingestion of phytosterols in the diet to circulating blood cholesterol. Okay, in this case, it's so-called bad cholesterol, low-density lipoprotein. Okay, and you see that there's considerable noise, but the fact of the decline with increased phytosterol intake of uh, of um, uh, in this case, it's the log of the change of the bad cholesterol in your blood as a response to phytosterol intake. And the message is quite clear. You want to lower your LDL, you can use statins or whatever, and those are very effective. But you can help it along, or maybe you won't need it at all if you have ample amount of phytosterols. And again, don't lose sight of the fact that this one simple change, take this small amount of protein you get from beef, replace it with the same amount of protein from plant-based sources, and you get, instead of zero phytosterol, because phyto means plants, and of course, by definition, it doesn't occur in, or they don't occur in meat. So there's no, there's it's zero here. But if you replace that beef with plant-based alternatives, you get 50% of the total amount typically in the American diet. And you can look here at another one, okay? If you recall earlier, I showed you that both total fiber and soluble fiber shoot way up, in other words, go way to the right upon replacing beef with plant-based alternative. What does that do? Well, here are, you take the whole population, you divide it into five roughly equal parts in terms of fiber consumption. This is the fifth of the population that consumes the least fiber. This is the fifth that consumes the most fiber. And here is the rate incidence of all-cause mortality in percent. And you see that whereas here it's something like, I don't know, maybe 22, 23%, here it is only about 9. So again, you roughly have your odds of all-cause death. And all else being equal, having your odds of dying is a pretty nice outcome. Okay, another one that here again, I want to show you this. It's hard to see because this thing kind of covers it, but take a look at this. These two nutrients that occur in, let me make it small for a minute so you can see it. Here it is, okay? Oops. There is none in beef or meat, and there is tremendous amount in the replacement. Okay, so let's see what that does to the human body, and that's shown right here. So let's look at this. Okay, here they are. In the previous result, they were lumped together. Here they are discussed individually. Nutrient 1 in panel A, nutrient B in panel B. Okay, so I need to explain to you what it is. You take this is something that measures the presence of oxidants, those molecules like oxygen singlet or something like that, or hydrogen peroxide and so on, that are thought to cause genetic damage. And you ask across a membrane how rapidly they disappear in the presence of variable amounts of this nutrient shown right here. So just to be clear, time zero, you use a laser to zap the membrane, and that produces a lot of those oxidants. Okay, and then you follow the cell side of the membrane, or not the cell, the mitochondria side of the membrane, and you follow it over something like 100 microseconds to see how rapidly that oxidant decays. Basically, what you want is for it to disappear as fast as possible. You know, like, for example, if you eat something nasty and that result, or you have chronic inflammation and that results in the presence of oxidants, you want your cellular metabolism to get rid of it as fast as possible, thereby lowering the odds that it will cause genetic damage. Okay, so take a look at this. In the presence of high concentration of this nutrient, shown in green, blue and green right here, very fast, within about 18 microseconds, it completely disappears. Okay? Now, let's go to lower amount. For example, in orange, 6.9 micromolar of this nutrient. And what do we see? Well, now it lingers much more. And instead of taking 18 microseconds, it now takes something like 45. What about in the complete absence of that, like you will have if you didn't do the replacement and just stuck with the steak? Well, now it never goes down to really low levels, and it stays pretty high for a very long time. The total damage is proportional to the area under the curve. In other words, the intensity times duration of the exposure. Clearly, you really want to be in the green or blue regime, and you most certainly do not wish to be in the brown regime. That's the point. And that point carries over perfectly nicely to the other nutrient. The same behavior arises before. And you see, just to be sure that your measurements are robust and so on, they started measuring the activity of those oxidants before the laser zapping, just to see that the machinery, the detection limits are such that you can really see zero. And lo and behold, you see nicely zero here and zero here. So the bottom line is, in terms of